Yes or no, should the U.S. continue its use of drone strikes to fight terrorism abroad? Jahana?
Yes.
Richard Blumenthal, Chris Murphy, and Elizabeth Esty are strong supporters of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. Will you continue this tradition?
This is a very complicated question. A very complicated question. And what I would say to answer it is that I wouldn't make a decision without having all of the information. We have to make a pathway to citizenship clearer and faster. People and families should not be waiting 40 years to even file the paperwork. We have to make sure that our government agencies operate in a way that respects human and civil rights. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Civility and decency is an American thing. When we talk about the pathway to citizenship, voting on things that are unpopular, we should not still be talking about immigration, about DACA, about all of these issues that we could have already voted on. People are afraid to vote against party lines. People are afraid to vote for something that may seem unpopular. How about just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do? So this idea that certain people from certain countries have more value than other people, I reject it because I've seen otherwise. And I know it's out there, and I know what we can become, and we just need people that are bold enough to face it, look it in the eye, and call it what it is. It is racist, it is immoral, and it is not who we are.
What would be your idea for the limit to which you would compromise some firmly held beliefs, such as not funding the wall, to forge some kind of a workable immigration bill?
I think that, first of all, the idea of building a wall is absurd. It's absurd. I remember being a student in high school and hearing the American president demand that Gorbachev tear down the wall. How are we 20 years later talking about building a wall? I think it's absurd. You know, I understand the need for border security. I understand the need to protect, American soil. However, I think that the conversations that we're having two very different conversations. We need a robust immigration reform bill. Something that will provide multiple pathways to citizenship for the people who come to this country, just like it's always been. But when we talk about a wall, let's just call it what it is. It's racist. We're talking about putting a wall on the southern border of this country, not the northern border. Let's just call it what it is. So when you ask me, what would my limit be? My limit would be, how about let's just get immigration right? How about let's create multiple pathways to citizenship so that people can legally become American citizens, so they're not waiting for their paperwork to be processed for decades, so they are not here living in fear in communities where they can't even report when something happens because they know that their rights will be taken away from them. How about let's just call it what it is? It's racist.
There's no compromise. Were you finished? No. Because I don't think you were out of time.
No, I was not. Yeah. So I think that's what we do. Most of the people in this country would agree with this. We've been kicking this can down the road for too long. We would not have the issues that we're having today with DACA if the DREAM Act had been passed. It's not enough to keep making these incremental moves. We need bold people who are just going to do it, who understand what that looks like in our communities, who have come face to face with children and families who are living in fear, who know what it means to be marginalized, and I think that's what it is. We have to have laws that say, I can only care about it when someone comes for me. I have to care about it just because it's wrong. Just because it's wrong. It can't just be immigrants fighting for the rights of immigrants. It has to be every person who has any moral fiber standing up and saying this is wrong. And we're not going to let this happen, and we're going to hold our leaders accountable and our elected officials to do what we sent them to Washington to do. We need a DREAM Act that allows people all over this country to have a pathway to citizenship. We're in a place where People are trying to scare us of people who look different, people who sound different, people who come from different places. So I'm going to say, just like I said at the beginning, be not afraid. Use your voices to speak up for people who don't have a voice. I recognize that we have to balance the safety and security of our borders, but I also know that we have to have immigration policies that reflect our morals and values as a country, that are civil, that are humane, and that represent what an American democracy looks like.
Well, I think we have to think about, most of the people who are coming are seeking asylum. This is a country where we're built on our diversity. So if we want to make it where people can come, they can fill out the paperwork, then we need to create a clearer pathway. One where, immediately we can begin to hear these cases in court before judges and not just make snap decisions that separate families and turn people away at the border. Where when we have situations where there is an urgency of need, where people's lives are in danger, that we address them immediately and put them on the pathway to citizenship. And we have to do this in a humane way. So securing our borders is very important. I get it. But that security has to align with our values as a nation, with our constitutional values, with those democratic values that we hold dear. And that is that we are a country that values diversity, that values people and the differences that they bring. So we have to create a system that is inclusive and welcoming of that diversity, and not a sharp contrast to what is happening now with our current policy.
We have to look at it as an investment. Give incentives for young people who stay here. Forgive loans. 10 years, 20 years. How long should young people be paying these loans? Right now, they can't be forgiven. Give housing incentives for people who stay here and work in the state. And finally, I think that we need to look closely at putting a moratorium on programs that are graduating kids who can't get jobs. Why are they accepting kids into programs that they know there is not a need for? Make sure that kids will be ready for the workforce that is waiting for them, and not just take their money and graduate them with a degree that they cannot use. We have to get more people socially mobile so that they are paying into the system in order to ensure that it's viable. You can't have more coming out than going in. That's just basic. People should not have to choose one or the other. We have to make sure that people are working at jobs where they can afford to sustain their families, and not just have a job, but have a career or a profession. And that can be available to everyone. We just have to make sure that people are prepared and the talent pool is there for the jobs that exist.
And one of the first things that the current Secretary of Education said to me when I met her was, I want to move government out the way so that parents and families can speak for their children. And my question was, who would have spoken for me? Isn't that your job? I didn't have a family who knew how to advocate for me. Isn't that your job to make sure that our public schools are the best that they can be? Isn't that your job? What she was saying to me was, I want to give a voice, a louder voice, to the people who already have a voice, and disregard everyone else.
Well, I think there's a couple things about that question. First of all, we have to look at education as an investment. You looked at the differences between a community like Simsbury and a community like Waterbury when we talk about education funding. Now, in my life, I grew up in public housing. I was raised by my grandmother. My mother was an addict. The school that I went to had to be a good school because I didn't have anyone to advocate for me. So we have to make sure that we are creating educational opportunities that benefit all kids, that the students who need them most. This wasn't a choice for me. There are many communities and many families in the state that have a choice. If they don't like the schools that they're being serviced with or that are provided in their community, they can move out of that community or choose another school. For so many other families, that's not a choice. So we have to work hard to fight for those kids, to make sure that they are getting the funding and the resources so that they at least have access to the same opportunities.
First thing you can do in education that helps both the urban and rural districts in the fifth?
Well, I think when we talk about education, the biggest single problem is access, equitable access to education. It should not matter where you live or what your zip code is, the type of education you receive. We have to make sure that all of our children in all of our communities receive a high quality education. That's going to look very different. You know, people talk about equality in education. It's not about equality. It's about equity. It's about giving everyone exactly what they need. It should not be where some communities have a surplus, you know, and have all the resources they need, and other communities don't have enough. You know, in this state, every child that goes to school should know that every parent who sends their child to school should know that this is the best education that they should receive, that they can receive. And as a state and as a country, we have to do everything to make that happen, whether it is putting the resources and the supports in place, putting highly trained educators in front of those children, you know, making sure they have the mentoring and the support that's necessary, making sure that our students with disabilities get everything that they need. It's about equitable access and making sure everyone has exactly what they need when they walk into a school.
In Waterbury, I wanted to develop a mentorship program for teachers to diversify our educator workforce. I was told there's no money for that. I went online, I went to the state Board of Education and advocated for $75,000 that I brought into my district and built a program.
Should vouchers be given to parents for choices in their kids' schooling?
No. I didn't have a college savings plan. I didn't have a family that put money away, but I was able to apply for government loans and pay them back at a low interest. The fact that we're even considering taking those things away, the fact that we're even looking at removing affirmative action from the college decision-making process. There are so many people who are disproportionately impacted, and we have to make sure that we have laws in place that protect everybody, to make it easier to borrow money, to make it easier to pay back money. I have young people who don't want to go to college because they risk having $100,000 in loans for a profession that pays $25,000. That is a disproportionate balance. So we have to look at what does it cost and hold institutions of higher education accountable. Why should a university administrative staff be making millions of dollars and budget cuts everywhere, and the only people that are footing the bill are the students with increased tuition? It has to be equitable across the board, and we have to make sure that we are responding to the needs of the economy, that we are training young people so that when they come out of college, they'll be job ready and there'll be a job waiting for them. You know, in education, they were cranking out elementary school teachers and these kids couldn't get jobs when we needed math and science teachers. So we have to make sure that universities are responsive and not just cashing the checks. That is something that has to happen across the board, because the pride of this nation is the fact that we educate our young people. We will be judged by the way we treat our children. So that is something that I mean, that's my thing.
What role should the government and specifically Congress play in promoting renewable energy?
Black and Hispanic students have significantly higher rates of asthma because of the air that they breathe every day. There are more medical visits and hospital stays for asthma-related incidences in the Waterbury public school system than anywhere else in the state. We have more kids who miss school because of the air that they breathe. The biggest threat to this country at this time is Donald J. Trump. And I dismiss in America when we are being dragged down by Trump. That's not who we are.